Tonight, in a Fox 8 investigation, we uncover growing concerns about lead in the city's drinking water.
The New Orleans Sewage and Water Board told us it was confident the city's water was safe, but an independent researcher from LSU says she has consistently found detectable lead in the hundreds of buildings that she has sampled. Kimberly Kurth has our latest Fox 8 investigation.
When they're thirsty, they'll just put the cup up to the faucet.
Hillary Maloney Sutton won't let her children do that anymore.
And I thought that was okay up until now.
As part of a federally required lead monitoring program, the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board
All right, we got our water running here.
had Sutton's water tested last year. And in this November 2016 letter obtained by Fox 8, they informed her that it was within federal safety limits.
I didn't like the fact that there was any lead in the water, but they seemed to be telling me, hey, it's manageable. It's just 3 parts per billion.
But LSU researchers also tested Sutton's water, and she agreed to share those results with us. Of their 4 samples, 2 tested within federal safety limits, but 2 others tested above. In fact, they came in more than 3 times higher than the Sewage and Water Board's result at 15.4 and 16.8 parts per billion. That's above what's called the EPA's action level. Here's what you need to know about that. All utilities are required to monitor their city's drinking water under what's called the Lead and Copper Rule, or LCR. According to those federal standards, no more than 10% of the homes sampled in that utility may exceed the action level of 15 parts per billion. Again, 2 of the samples from Sutton's house tested above the EPA's action level.
I raised my children here. So as I understand it, they were here through the formative years of their development. So, and I trusted that the water was safe.
And according to that LSU research, Sutton's home isn't the only one with elevated lead levels.
Now I've sampled over 400 buildings in New Orleans area.
Adrienne Kattner is an assistant LSU professor of environmental and occupational health sciences. She's been studying lead levels across the city since 2015.
Even though I'm finding pretty consistently low water lead levels, it's consistently detected. So over 90-something% of my homes had detectable lead. And so what that tells me is that especially for these vulnerable populations, it's something we just need to be aware of.
Kattner says it's important to remember exposure to even low levels of lead can be dangerous, especially in children, pregnant women, or infants.
So the action level is not a health-based standard, and it was never intended to be. EPA has always said that this is a screening tool. In general, a lot of the homes had much lower water lead levels than you would see in like a place like Flint. But again, there's really no safe blood lead level in a child. We see at lower and lower levels, lead can impact them and can impact them permanently.
The Sewage and Water Board says samples in New Orleans have been consistently below the EPA's action level of 15 parts per billion. Because of this, the Sewage and Water Board only has to test for lead in the water every 3 years. In 2016, the utility tested 107 homes, including Sutton's, and officials report they found only 2 homes above the EPA's action level. In those cases, the Sewage and Water Board replaced its side of the customer's lead service lines, which are the pipes that carry the water from the main pipeline to your house. Kattner says alarmingly high lead levels were found in some of the homes she tested that had lead service lines replaced.
When you only do a partial lead service line, as it's called, in other words, the utility only replaces their side of the line, you can have these very high spikes of water lead levels. And there's no requirement for the utility to tell the resident after these line replacements, and there's no requirement for them to change out the residence line unless they're not in compliance with the regulations.
In April, we asked the executive director of the Sewage and Water Board about Sutton's lead levels. He insisted then that the drinking water in New Orleans is safe and well within federal and state guidelines.
So if this was your home or your family, would you let your family drink this water?
I participated in the testing. Yes, I drink the water every day.
But Fox 8 has learned the New Orleans Inspector General is now looking into how the Sewage and Water Board tests drinking water. The IG sent this letter to Sutton asking for her help as his office reviews how the utility selected participants for its testing process and whether the selected sites met federal criteria.
I haven't seen the results of his analysis. What I believe to be is not an inspection, but an audit of the processes that the DHH and EPA conducted to do our triennial test, and I anxiously await the results to comment on them.
In the meantime, Sutton says she's not taking any chances.
We drink only bottled water. We cook with bottled water.
Since our April interview, we got more detailed information about that LSU research. So we once again reached out to the Sewage and Water Board for a response, but they told us they were not available today to do an interview. The LSU researcher we spoke with says a water filter can go a long way toward reducing your lead exposure, but not just any filter. You want to look for one that has an NSF 53 certification and says it removes lead. She also recommends cleaning out your aerator filter every week. For more information on how you can reduce your exposure, just go to our website and look for this story.
How the Sewage and Water Board has tested the safety of the city's drinking water.
Yes, plus could its testing have resulted in lower lead readings than what is actually occurring in New Orleans? Kimberly Currett has our latest investigation.
We all need it to survive, and most of us trust that it's safe. But a Fox 8 investigation has uncovered the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board used the homes of its own employees to test for lead as part of federally required water safety monitoring.
It's really frowned upon because, first off, it's a conflict of interest. There's a perception issue. But secondly, more practically, it's very unlikely the employees are living in the worst case homes in the city. It's possible. But you're really trying to be seeking out those worst case homes and test those. That's the only way the law can work.
Under that law called the Lead and Copper Rule, or LCR, the Environmental Protection Agency requires utilities test the highest risk homes in their city for lead.
They're supposed to find the worst case homes in the city and then sample those because it's this very few houses that you're testing to determine whether the safety level of an entire city.
Through a public records request last summer, Fox 8 obtained a list of 103 addresses that the Sewage and Water Board said it tested in 2016 as part of the Lead and Copper Rule. Using public property tax records, we cross-checked the addresses and found at least 6 properties connected to 6 Sewage and Water Board employees. They include Executive Director Cedric Grant, along with the Deputy Communications Director, a Senior Office Support Specialist, a Water Purification Operator, a Power Dispatcher, and a Utility Senior Services Manager. While not illegal, one of the nation's leading lead experts says that kind of testing is not only a conflict of interest, it can also lead to questionable results.
That has been a loophole that has caused problems in some cities, and that in some cities as many as 50% of the homes being sampled were employee homes, and it's really such an extraordinary conflict of interest. And also, again, if they're not the worst case homes in the city, you're fooling yourself. You're getting a number and reporting a number for lead that's much lower than what is actually occurring in the worst case homes required by the law.
In an April interview about independent lead testing at a New Orleans resident's home, the executive director of the Sewage and Water Board had this to say about water safety in the city.
If this was your home or your family, would you let your family drink this water?
I participated in the test, and yes, I drink the water every day.
And as we first told you, the New Orleans Inspector General is now looking into how the Sewage and Water Board selected its participants for water testing and whether those selected sites met federal criteria. In that April interview, Grant outlined their process.
Did it meet the federal criteria?
Yes, it did, and they were volunteers. We don't mandate anybody take the test. We ask for volunteers. We went to public meetings and asked people would they be willing to participate in the test. We did it in other parts of the community where it's more likely that pre-1986 services are installed and the like. We followed the protocols to the letter.
After we found Sewage and Water Board employees on the list, we asked for more details on how they picked participants for 2016 testing. In a statement, the board reiterated Grant's initial response. They also said each volunteer site was excavated to ensure there were lead service lines to include in their testing process. What this statement doesn't address is how the Sewage and Water Board's own employees ended up on the sampling list. Lead expert Mark Edwards says it's critically important that utilities do their testing the right way.
Well, this is an important federal law, and lead is the best known neurotoxin, and not only is any unnecessary lead exposure, dangerous, but public health warnings, parents take advice on the basis of the law and the safety status of the drinking water in the city to protect themselves and their children. So it doesn't get any more important than that.
The Sewage and Water Board is already under fire after a scathing report from the New Orleans Inspector General. The IG says residents may have been unknowingly exposed to elevated lead levels in their drinking water because of infrastructure projects under construction in the city. That work can disturb the water supply system and cause significant increases in water lead levels, possibly for months.
We now recognize that some of these levels of lead are so high it's equivalent to ingesting lead paint chips. No one would argue ingesting lead paint chips is a chronic problem. One-time exposure can elevate a child's blood lead to dangerous levels.
The IG also says the city and the Sewage and Water Board did not adequately alert New Orleanians about the risk of increased exposure to lead in the water and didn't comply with industry best practices by providing those residents with ways to reduce that risk.
They should start following the letter of the law. They should start following the spirit of the law. They should start implementing these best practices as indicated by the IG report.
The Sewage and Water Board released a statement late today acknowledging their employees did take part in the 2016 lead and copper rule testing. The board says, quote, "We don't ask our customers to do anything we wouldn't do ourselves. Our employees are customers, residents, and neighbors who make up a cross-section of New Orleans." To get caught up on our investigation, just go to our news app or website and look for this story. There you will also find tips on how to protect yourself and your family from elevated lead levels in your tap water. Lee.
His comments come after a meeting with the city council today where a council member had questions about which homes the board tested for lead. Kimberly Kurth brings us tonight's Fox 8 investigation.
A Fox 8 investigation uncovered the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board used the homes of its own employees to test for lead as part of federally required water safety monitoring. Those 6 employees included Executive Director Cedric Grant and 5 other staff members. We caught up with Grant and asked him about that. Can you just tell us why that you included some of the Sewage and Water Board employees' homes in the testing?
The same thing I've told you all the time. We're leading. Why wouldn't we? We would ask our customers to do something we wouldn't do ourselves.
Are you concerned that that could be a conflict of interest?
No, I'm not. I'm concerned that you're questioning my integrity instead of showing my leadership.
But we spoke with one of the nation's leading lead experts who told us while that kind of testing is not illegal, it is considered a conflict of interest that can lead to questionable results.
That has been a loophole that has caused problems in some cities, and that in some cities as many as 50% of the homes being sampled were employee homes, and it's really such an extraordinary conflict of interest. And also, again, if they're not the worst case homes in the city, you're fooling yourself. You're getting a number and reporting a number for lead that's much lower than what is actually occurring in the worst case homes required by the law.
And this isn't the first time Edwards has weighed in on a city's water testing practices. According to this February 2016 report from The Guardian, Chicago's water department also used its own employees' homes to test for lead. In their investigation, Edwards raised questions about a conflict of interest when it was revealed nearly half of the city's water samples came from the homes of department employees. At the City Council committee meeting, Councilwoman Susan Guidry questioned Grant about some of our findings and how the utility selected its testing sites.
6 were high-level employees, including yourself, of the Sewage and Water Board. Is your house a Tier 1?
In order to, we went to the community. I stood up at public meetings and asked people to participate.
Right.
Yes. I could not do that in good conscience without leading and saying I would do it myself. But in order to actually qualify it, we had to go out and determine whether my house and anybody else's house met that test of potential lead service, and it did. But again, my goal was not what was reported in the media. My goal was what I do every day, is lead.
Under a federal law called the Lead and Copper Rule, utilities must test the highest risk homes in their city for lead, or what's called Tier 1 sampling sites. Homes that have lead service lines would qualify.
With the other 5 employees, were they all tier 1?
Yes, because again, we dug first before you could put your name on the list. That doesn't mean that you necessarily got sampled. We could only sample tier 1.
The committee meeting follows a scathing report from the New Orleans Inspector General's office. The IG says residents may have been unknowingly exposed to elevated lead levels in their drinking water because of infrastructure projects under construction in the city. That work can disturb the water supply system and cause significant increases in water lead levels, possibly for months. While addressing that report at the committee meeting, Tulane toxicologist Dr. Luann White said in New Orleans, lead paint has been the primary source of childhood lead poisoning for many years.
Over the years, water has not been a major contributor to childhood lead poisoning. What we don't want to do is to blow out of proportion issues with water and then people forget about what are the major sources to children.
We now recognize that some of these levels of lead are so high it's equivalent to ingesting lead paint chips. No one would argue ingesting lead paint chips is a chronic problem. One-time exposure can elevate a child's blood lead to dangerous levels.
The city says there is no federal or state regulator that has questioned the Sewage and Water Board's testing, and the lead results continue to be well under federal and state testing guidelines. A city spokesman said federal law only required the Sewage and Water Board to test 80 homes in 2016, but the utility says it tested 107. Kimberly Kurth, Fox 8 News.